Okay, welcome to Sustainable News. What are the headlines? First of all, CNN is saying, do not come to Amsterdam. The capital of the Netherlands is telling rowdy tourists to stay away. Obviously, there has been the pandemic and these tourists could not come to Amsterdam. So no more large groups thronging the canal area, no more throwing up from drinks and from drugs. And what they're saying is, we have got our city back and we like it that way. So in short, they want people to stay in places like this, not in hostels, not those that hang around the red light district, that smoke a lot of dope and that puke and drink at all times of the day. I can understand it. Okay, next article, I read it from Al Jazeera, but has been all over the place about a leaked UN draft report, a warning of accelerating climate devastation. And I quote from the article here, the worst is still to come, affecting your children and your grandchildren's lives much more than your own life. And they talk about a number of effects here, species extinction, more widespread disease, unlivable heat, ecosystem collapse, cities menaced by rising seas, and they say these and other devastating climate effects are accelerating and are bound to become painfully obvious before the day that a child is born today will turn 30 years old. So I spoke with Mathias Lund Larsen, Director of International Cooperation at the International Institute of Green Finance. That's at CUFE in Beijing, China. At the moment, he's in Copenhagen, as he is attached as well to the Copenhagen Business School. I asked him about his article in the South China Morning Post, or SCMP. The title is Why a World Awash in Green Investments Cannot Find the Money for Sustainable Development Goals. Let's start with his views on the G7.
So all they promised was really they reiterated their goal of channeling $100 billion from the global north to the global south per year. So now, although they promised it in 15, now they're sort of promising the same thing one more time.
Right. Okay, in the article, it is mentioned that we have financial assets valued at 900 trillion US dollars, green investments, global green investments, 30 trillion US dollars, but the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are short of 2.5 trillion US dollars.
What has to change is our perception of what qualifies as sustainable investment. The argument is that we should, of course, put the money where the marginal benefit towards the Sustainable Development Goals is the highest, which is in certain sectors in the global south rather than in the global north. And this is because the global south obviously has more people, a bigger gap between current sustainable development performance and where we have to go, as opposed to the global north, which is completely flooded in cheap capital and is performing much better on sustainable development goals. So when we have 30 trillion of sustainably invested assets, most of these don't go where the marginal benefit is the highest. And that means that we should probably not call this sustainable investing. We should rather say that, okay, this is investing that takes environmental, social, and governance variables into account, rather than sustainable investing. And sustainable investing should then only be what actually actively contributes where the benefit is much bigger to sustainable development in the global south. So what has to change here is our concept of what qualifies as sustainable investing. Just to give an example, you can say, I'm in Copenhagen now. All the pension funds in Scandinavia care about women empowerment. So they look at how many women are on the boards of companies. And they say, we invest only in companies that have certain proportions of women, or say, we take this as a key concern in our investing. Say that is all good, but that is not going to solve women empowerment on a global scale. Think of the millions of child marriages, or of how many women lack primary education in the global south. It would obviously be hugely more beneficial to channel some money for women empowerment in the global south rather than in the global north. So when they call themselves sustainable investors, you can say, sure, they might care about some sustainability issues, but the benefit of their investing is certainly very limited towards the global achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that dialogue has to be had of how we change our perception of what qualifies as sustainable investing.
Okay, in the article is mentioned where do these investors, these sustainable investors, put their money. In the article it says at home, not in those places where it's needed, which is Asia and Africa, which is also more risky because they expect a higher return, 30 to 40% in Africa, because the politics and the instability and so on. So I asked Matthias, is it not more risky in those areas, and why those areas in particular?
It can be, but not necessarily. I mean, global capital markets work on the principles that capital flows to where returns are the highest, and financial products are priced by risk-weighted returns. So the money goes to where more money can be made. In the global north, in developed countries, there are many risky investments, new technologies. Say 20 years ago, wind and solar were new technologies with huge risks.
Yeah.
Investors were certainly not shy of putting their money into that back then. There is not a risk concern on the technology side then. Of course, when you invest in developing countries, the risks can be higher because the economy is less stable, the government bonds are highly credit rated. But if you then invest in a more mature technology in a more risky country, the overall risk weighting will still be completely comparable to investing in a risky technology in a developed country. So I don't see the risk as an excuse for not putting the money there either.
Many of the largest ESG indices still include the world's largest fossil fuel companies. And I would like to know, how on earth is it possible that ESG investment, sustainable investing, and that money ends up in the hands of fossil fuel companies?
The phenomenon is that if you invest based on ESG variables, environmental, social, and governance variables, often you get your rating from a rating company, and they give a rating to each of the companies you're interested in investing in. Yep. So if a fossil fuel company scores bad on the environmental factor, but they score very well on the social and governance factor, they might still have a pretty good ESG score. And therefore, even with an ESG conscious fund, you can end up having fossil fuel companies in there. And you and I can perhaps agree that this doesn't make much sense. But if you weigh the E, the S, and the G equally, then there is at least a logical reason why that happens. Okay. You can then have the funds declare officially that say, we are ESG conscious and we don't invest in any fossil fuels. That would make it, that would then avoid that problem at least.
Okay, last but not least, some tips for more sustainable living. This comes from a site called Global Stewards, and they have green eco tips for sustainable living. It comes down to, according to the site, reducing, reusing, recycling, refusing, and they talk about obviously also food switching to an animal-free vegan diet, which they say is a very powerful way to help protect the environment. I myself am not going to become a vegetarian or a vegan because I like actually eating meat. But that said, I did start eating a lot less meat, which is exactly what they want. Less than the diet in Holland, which is everyday meat, potatoes, and veggies. And obviously they talk about conserving energy as well. So have a look, there might be something there for you. I'll put a link in the show notes below.